then we can go ahead and begin. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Belhaven Action's first Ask the Doctor. It is important for our community to have access to information, healthcare resources, and the opportunity to ask questions concerning our community's health and wellness as it relates to COVID and COVID vaccine and any other concerns that they may have. I am honored and grateful to introduce our first guest, Dr. Kim Rhoads, a resilient leader in our health and wellness arena. Dr. Rhoads is an associate professor and epidemiologist and biostatistics. I may have pronounced those incorrectly. We also have Dr. Jeremiah Davis, an associate medical director in pediatrics at Ravenswood Family Health Network. And my name is Cecilia Taylor. I am your moderator for the evening. We also have Dr. Luisa Buada from Ravenswood Family Health. And we also have Natalie Hodgen. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name incorrectly. And we do have a member of the public here, and we also have the rest of the Belhaven Action team, Anelka Perez and Julie Shanson here. And at this time, I would like to pass it to Dr. Rhoads to do a fuller introduction of herself. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Cecilia, for inviting me to participate in this panel. I'm happy to have the opportunity to share what I know and what we don't know about COVID-19 and vaccines. It's okay to mispronounce epidemiology because I am formally trained actually as a surgeon, but I also have a background in health services research looking at health equity and quality of care for racial and ethnic minorities in California. And I am the founding director of Umoja Health, which is about 30 community-based organizations who work together in Alameda County to provide both COVID-19 testing and vaccination using a pop-up in neighborhood strategy directed by the folks who are in the collaborative and then actually run on the ground by the folks who are in the collaborative. So happy to be here, and thank you again.
Thank you. Dr. Davis? Dr. Davis, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Thanks. My name is Jeremiah Davis. I'm a pediatrician at Ravenswood Family Health Network and appreciate the invitation to participate. And I have been working in the last year as part of the larger network effort, just seeing patients during the COVID pandemic, as well as helping to facilitate vaccination whenever we can. And as a pediatrician, I'm particularly excited over the events in the last few weeks in terms of authorization in an emergency capacity for younger and younger individuals to have an opportunity to be protected against COVID. So I'm happy to contribute what I know, and I really appreciate the way Dr. Rhoads framed it and share what we don't know yet exactly either, but what we're excited about. So thanks so much for letting me be here.
Thank you. Dr. Buada?
So I must say I am not a doctor. I am a public health nurse, however, and for many, many years, and have worked in community health since 1973. So I do have sort of community cred in that regard, but working with many, many populations over the years. And I've been at Ravenswood Family Health Center as the CEO for 19 years. So I'm happy to be here tonight and talk about what we do in terms of the vaccine programs and the kinds of targeted vaccine events we would like to do going into the future.
Thank you, Ms. Buada. And we appreciate you being here. And Ms. Hodgen?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Natalie Hodgen. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Ravenswood Family Health Network. I've been with Ravenswood for only a year and a half, but I have been in community health for over 16 years. It's a passion, and it's been a lot of work this year with COVID. We have learned a lot. Looking forward to doing more for our patients, especially as we continue to be able to provide for the children. So happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here, and we'll go into our first questions. Just thinking about how do we know the vaccine is safe for our kids? And that question is for anyone who wants to answer it. Dr. Davis?
I'm happy to start, and then definitely others, please feel free to fill in gaps or correct me. We have really strong evidence about the safety of the vaccines that are available, and I'm mostly going to make comments around the Pfizer vaccine, since that's the one that we have been authorized to use down to 12 years of age or older, but some of the comments apply also to the other vaccines that are available to adults. We have been fortunate enough to get, I think, some of the fastest data around clinical trials for vaccine development, probably in the history of the US, maybe the history of the world, provided to us and provided really across the board to the public and to clinicians. And what we know so far about the vaccine from those studies is that it is remarkably effective at preventing COVID-19, and it also is remarkably safe. So the trials that have been conducted on Pfizer have included over 2,000 patients in that age range, and they have seen similar rates of the types of side effects that we've seen in adults, and have yet to see any significant or serious adverse events that can be linked to the vaccine in those clinical trials. We're also fortunate to be watching real time as the vaccines are being provided by the millions across the United States and across other countries, and getting data given back to us very quickly about how that is affecting people who receive it. And there are some side effects which we need to be very diligent about, including serious allergic reactions, which, while they didn't appear in the trials to the teenage patients, the young adolescents that received it, we know from real world experience that this is a rare but true side effect that can happen to some individuals. So we overwhelmingly have found that the types of side effects that kids get are similar to what adults get, and they include, for the most part, very mild side effects. The most common ones are going to be things like pain where you get the injection, fatigue, and headache are probably the most common. There are a few other side effects that are common in terms of body aches, muscle aches, some fevers, and that type of thing. But compared to the type of risk you have by actually getting COVID-19 and complications from COVID-19, those transient side effects are well worth it. And so for me, as a pediatrician and as someone who talks about vaccines all the time, it's very exciting to be able to tell people this is a vaccine that works extremely well. The side effects are, for the most part, extremely mild. And the serious ones, we are getting a good glimpse at because of how widely we're using the vaccine and giving information across different networks. And so we are prepared to try to monitor and react to those side effects if they should happen.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Did anyone else want to add? Okay, well, we'll move on to the next question. Can the vaccine affect the growing bodies of teens during puberty?
I'm happy to jump in on this one too, unless anybody else wants. So that's a great question. I think in pediatrics, especially when it comes to vaccines and immunizations, we have an extra layer of care and concern because there is so much left to happen in a child's biology, and especially as they grow. So not just in terms of puberty, but in terms of earlier ages, because even though we're talking about 12 years old and above patients and teenagers today, 6 months from now, I think we'll be having similar conversations about even younger children. What we know is that the immune system, as we age, does change to some degree, but in what we've found is that actually younger individuals actually mount better responses in many cases to the types of diseases we're trying to prevent. An example I can give where we know this already to be true, the human papillomavirus vaccine, which is the only vaccine we have licensed that prevents cancer, is a vaccine that actually showed itself to be more effective in younger aged individuals than in older aged teenagers. And so as a result of good data around that vaccine, we actually recommended fewer doses for that vaccine after it had been in use for several years. So instead of a 3-dose series, if it started before 15, it can be done as a 2-dose series. That's just one example, but it illustrates the kind of biology in teenagers that I think we're excited to be able to offer this vaccine and utilize those good responses earlier to be able to protect children even better. As far as the safety monitoring that has gone on so far, we have not seen any adverse effects that we think would be linked to problems with puberty or growth. I think this is an area, as Dr. Rhoads alluded to before, where there's some things we need to be honest about what we don't know. We don't have 10 years worth of data or 20 years of data or 30 years worth of data. The pandemic is affecting us too quickly for us to wait that long to say, okay, we're going to wait 10 years before we use the vaccine. We're balancing the risk of people have very serious complications and children and teens getting very serious complications from COVID-19 against the theoretical risks of longer term effects that we can't monitor for quite yet because we don't have that much time with the data. That being said, when these trials are done, they're looking at a number of safety indicators and trying to monitor for things they think would cause issues in terms of those kind of normal functions. So for me as a pediatrician, my suspicion that it's going to affect puberty or growth in children is quite low. And hopefully with more years of experience, we'll feel more and more confident about that. But this is where I think we have to also rely on the scientists who do this, as their profession and look for the kinds of side effects that we worry about to affect those types of systems. So I don't know if others have comments to add, or Dr. Rhoads, if you ever thought.
Yeah, when I read this question in the preparation for the panel, the thing I thought about that people are worrying about is fertility, potentially. And the thing I guess I would add is, obviously we don't have the longevity with this vaccine with these vaccines, I should say, as we do with other vaccinations, but they are based on a technology called mRNA, which is a piece of genetic material, if you will, that is highly fragile. So in my previous life, when I was a basic scientist working with RNA, I like to point out to people that in order to prepare your area for working with RNA, you have to spray the area down, spray your hands down, wipe everything off, because what you need to get rid of are these enzymes that actually gobble up and destroy mRNA. So it's very fragile and it doesn't stick around for a long time. So in order for something to affect someone's fertility, it would have to be hanging around, incorporated into our bodies, and to become part of who we are. And so I just want to point out that the fragility of the actual active ingredient in the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines is not stable enough to stick around long enough to have the kind of impact that people are concerned about in terms of fertility. So I just would add that to what we know.
Thank you. The next question is, our family had COVID-19. We have antibodies, right? Do we still need the vaccine?
So the short answer is yes, we still recommend that you get vaccinated. What we think COVID is that they last about 3 months before they start to taper off. And what we don't know is whether or not a challenge with another exposure to COVID and infection, whether or not you're protected. So it's not like chicken pox, right? Once you've had it, then you're not going to get it again. And in fact, we have seen second infections with COVID that can happen with other strains. And in fact, the second infection, if it happens, is often worse in terms of the clinical symptoms that someone would suffer. So having had COVID in the past does not protect you against getting COVID again. The people who are in the initial clinical trials, folks should really kind of focus on, because they are at about a year out from their first vaccination. And in those participants, their immunity has been measured and their antibody responses have been measured. And at the 1 year mark, they still have a good level of circulating antibody in response to the vaccine. So the vaccine response in terms of your immunity against getting COVID is much more durable than your own innate production.
Thank you, Dr. Rhoads. Did any of the other panelists want to add?
I think Dr. Rhodes summarized it perfectly. I think that's another key area where we're hopeful about how long the immunity to the virus will last with the vaccine. And so just knowing that your natural immunity may not protect you past that 3-month mark, this is a really great opportunity to give your body as much of a defense as possible, even if you have had immunity from your own responses previously.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Right now, I'm actually going to shift to a question that a member of the public has, and that is, why was the mandate to wear masks in the public lifted? Isn't it too early?
I have a lot of feelings about this. I think this was kind of a messaging problem. I think the CDC is in a hurry to have us feel good about something, right? It's been a year of sort of dismal news, people dying, people getting infected, having a mystery disease circulating among us, people having feelings about whether they want to be vaccinated or not, shortages of things, starting with toilet paper. It's just been an emotional time. And what I think happened in the way I summarize it is like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So I think what the CDC was sharing with us is that the data is telling us that the vaccines are highly, highly effective. And for example, if everyone were vaccinated, it probably would be okay to take off your mask. But the publications that came out of that research didn't say, okay, everybody take off your mask. So I think the CDC went to that conclusion because they wanted people to feel good about something. They wanted potentially to incentivize people to get vaccinated. So really the way it should be interpreted, I think, is it's good news that the vaccines work really well. I don't agree that it's time to take off our masks. And I don't think that on June 15th, it will be time to take off our masks either, because the people who typically didn't want to wear masks are the same people who may not believe COVID is real and so may not be vaccinated. And what you won't know when you're out without your mask on and everybody else is maskless, you won't know who's been vaccinated and who hasn't. And so for me as a vaccinated person, that means that I could be putting other people at risk. So unvaccinated people are at risk. They can get COVID from a vaccinated person. And so I think that it was a mistake. And what's good about where we are living here in Northern California is that I think we have a lower proportion of people who are anti-mask than other parts of the country. So I think a lot of people are going to continue to wear the mask regardless of the mandate being lifted.
As I like to joke with folks, 95% is good, but it's not 100% when it comes to protection. So I'll keep my mask on if I'm not sure that I'm going to be in close quarters with someone who's not vaccinated. I also I think part of the excitement that people have in general is, when you first look at how well a vaccine works, you can only really look at things like in your blood, your antibody levels, that type of protection. We don't really know in the real world very well until you get out there and start using it broadly if it's going to cut down on transmission of the virus between people, in addition to protecting me individually. And I think the evidence that's coming out is promising, but 100% agree with Dr. Rhoads. I think it's a little premature to be taking all the masks away, even in areas like this one where we have a relatively high uptake.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. I have a follow-up question. So what do we do? Because our community is looking to the CDC, looking to leadership to guide them on we got advice, and now you're saying don't take that advice. So what do we do now for messaging? especially thinking about Ravenswood Health Clinic. I'm thinking about just what do we tell people? How do we address it?
So I can respond. I mean, in healthcare settings, we will continue to do all the same things because of this fact that we don't know who's vaccinated, who's not. There are people in a healthcare organization also who have the same concerns and may not want to be vaccinated for their own concerns. They want to wait and see. So there is a percentage, even in our health center, in hospitals, everywhere you go. So we, as a protection not only of each other, because we know better in many ways, we know about transmission, we are going to protect ourselves and our patients by continuing to wear masks, by continuing to social distance and screen people when they come in. We have lifted screening for staff we know are vaccinated, but it's more of an honor system. But we are doing all the things to make sure we are not the perpetrators of transmission of more disease. And we'll, of course, continue to do as much vaccinations as possible, more targeted ones, to try to reach out to those people who say, well, I am going to get vaccinated, but I don't want to stand in line. Or I want to get vaccinated, but I don't want to deal with the side effects. Or if it was closer to my house, or if it was more convenient. So we're really going to start working on reaching out to those people, because we know at the end of the day, the more people who are vaccinated, the better we all are. But no, we are not taking our masks off. And I definitely am not in public at home, because my family's vaccinated and I know how they behave, that they don't take risks. Then I feel okay to be home. But if someone comes to the house that I don't know, even if they're related to me, I'm going to wear a mask.
Thank you. Dr. Rhoads, did you want to add something?
No, I think Luisa covered it. And I guess I want to say that we shouldn't think of this as a sort of, the CDC has made a mistake, and so now, it's kind of wobbly and we don't know what to trust. I really honestly think that we're reporting what the data is showing us. But again, wanted to offer something happy and uplifting. And there's no downside to wearing masks. Even when we're not in a pandemic, there literally is no downside to wearing a mask. So I think that allows people to have some agency and make a decision, especially as we know that people who are not vaccinated will be potentially taking their masks off.
Thank you. Our next question is, I'm healthy and I don't go out to see anyone. Why do I need a vaccine?
I'm happy to offer initial thoughts, but I think many of us on the call could probably give you several good reasons. For me, I understand this, because I definitely have individuals who have been so self-aware of the COVID pandemic that they really, they've barely left they've barely gone. For me, I kind of try to frame it too. In our day-to-day routine, your risk may be relatively low, but there are things that happen in life that we can't anticipate. And so I think it's a good reminder for people to be prepared for all situations, not just what's going on 90% of the time. I can't predict if I'm gonna need to go see my clinician, or I'm gonna need to go to the emergency room for something. But sometimes life happens, and in those situations, even though you may need care, you may be in a situation where there are high exposures to things like viruses around you. So I think it's worth people considering that even if you feel like you are going to be relatively safe in your daily routine, there may be things that interrupt that routine, and you would really like to have prepared for that ahead of time if you could. I think also there's a bit of a mindset where we think, I'll just wait it out. I'm just going to wait. This will pass. It'll go away, and then we won't have to deal with it. And I'll never have had to get the vaccine. From my understanding of the data, and Dr. Rose, others can jump in, I don't think people are anticipating that this virus is going to disappear with the vaccine altogether. We're already seeing variants, and on a good front, some of the data we're seeing about transmission, that the vaccine seem to be pretty effective against some of the variants. But I think, and honestly, what we know about these types of viruses is that they're likely to change, and they're likely to to adapt. And so we need to be ready to adapt with them. And so the idea that you're going to kind of permanently keep yourself from risk, I just try to caution people to think a little bit more broadly about how they could protect them.
Dr. David, you put yourself on mute.
Sorry, I'm having a choppy connection for a second. I apologize if I cut off part of that.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the variant. Can you talk more about what happens with a variant? I know that it is important to have the vaccine because of the variant, but how does that work if I've been vaccinated and now there's a new variant? Am I protected?
It's a good question. Before I jump into a variant question, and if there's an epidemiologist on the line, I always defer to them first.
So the way I like to describe or help people understand what a variant is that if you think about the vaccine, the mRNA vaccines in particular, just as I think a helpful way to think about it, it's basically a genetic code that is programmed into that vaccine that is like one side of a zipper. And what your body does is it creates the other side of the zipper. And if you have ever had a broken zipper, you know, if one tooth is off just by a little bit, like the zipper just really doesn't work. The two things don't fit together. So a variant is, if you can imagine, a variant has a code that may have a broken zipper. So it looks like this instead of like this. And the vaccine had been made to do this. So really what the variant is just a small shift in the code that may confer some better ability to transmit from person to person. For example, one of the first variants that we didn't talk much about it because we didn't have this language of variants in the public domain. When the spike protein, when the virus is extruded out of your cell, so it invades the cell, it tells the cell to make a whole bunch more viruses, and then the cell unleashes all those viruses into the rest of your body. One of the first mutations or changes in the genetic material made the spike protein more flexible. So it used to be the case that when the virus was pushed out of your cell, some of the spike proteins would break off, and it needs the spike protein in order to invade other cells. So one of the variations that happened, we didn't call it a variant, as I said at the time, made the spike protein flexible. So when it got extruded out, instead of bending the spike, instead of breaking, the spike would bend. So then it could get out of the cell and still have the capacity to infect other cells. So what the variants are adaptations that the virus is trying to make in order to become sort of more sturdy. Well, how do we get those variants and how do we get those changes in the DNA? It is literally about how many times the virus has to make itself or replicate over again. So it's about us mixing together. It's about the virus passing from person to person. Every time the virus is transmitted between people, there's an opportunity for a mistake in the genetic material and the evolution of a stronger variant. So in order to understand whether or not the vaccines that we currently have work against these variants, what we need to do, and what a lot of countries are doing, and I think we're doing it at a lower rate than other places, is when somebody is infected with the virus, we need to get the sequence of that virus and understand whether or not it is the standard variant. In California, for example, we have a California variant that is the predominant kind of coronavirus, or if it's one of these other variants that have been named, for example, the B117 that they think is from the United Kingdom, or the B1351, which they say is from South Africa. And then there's one called P2 that comes, they think, from Brazil. So are you protected against these variants with the current vaccines that we have? So far, what we know is for Pfizer and Moderna, they do pretty well against B117, which is the one they think comes from the United Kingdom. There is some decreased effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine so far that we know against the B1351, or the one that they call the South African variant. Moderna has not had as much press or evidence about its decreased effectiveness against that particular variant. So what can we do about it? Because we know these are just changes in the genetic sequence, we can actually make another mRNA vaccine. We just change the code so that the zipper fits together better. Right now, there are rumors in the scientific world that Pfizer is actually working on a new booster shot that has the mRNA has the genetic sequence to match with the B1351 variant. So it's unclear. I don't have any details about when that's coming or whether or not
Wanted to add to what Dr. Roach just shared. It was great. The zipper. I'm thinking about the zipper now. Anyone else on the panel want to add? Because I actually have another question along those lines. And I believe, Dr. Rhoads, it was you that actually explained this so well that I understood it. And this is with the different types of vaccines, there's assumptions about a vaccine being live when it's injected into or not, a vaccine being synthetic or not. Can you explain the differences between Moderna, Pfizer, and the J&J or any other vaccines that exist?
Sure, I'll start off just by pointing out that none of them are live. That's, I think, the most important thing just off the top. The difference is in how they're packaged, how they get into your body in order to teach your body how to create the defenses against the spike protein. Because all of them, for right now, all of them are focused on helping your body figure out a way to block the spike protein from acting as a key to unlock your cells and start the process of infection. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are both mRNA vaccines, and they are truly kind of just the mRNA. The rest of the packaging in order to get the mRNA into your body, remember I told you mRNA is super fragile. And so it has to be packaged in a way that protects it from being exposed to those enzymes that would otherwise destroy it very quickly. And so there's a wrapper around the mRNA molecule that is made up of lipid or fatty material and salts. That really defines the major difference between Pfizer and Moderna versus Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson uses DNA. So it's not using the one side of the zipper, it's using two sides of the zipper that your cells then have to unzip and then make copies, make the companion side of the zipper. But it's really the packaging that is the issue. The Johnson & Johnson is packaged in an adenovirus, which is a common cold virus, that it has been altered so that it is not going to cause an infection in a cold in your body. But that adenovirus knows how to unlock your cells so that it can inject the DNA, the double-stranded training material for your cells to start to make antibodies against the spike protein. So it's really about the packaging more than anything else. One is naked genetic material, just protected by salts and fatty molecules. And then the Johnson & Johnson is packaged in a cold virus that no longer has the capacity to cause a common cold. I think that and I'll defer to Dr. Davis on this, but the adenovirus way of getting the material delivered to your cells is more of a traditional model of how other vaccines that we already are very familiar with work. So I don't know if Dr. Davis, you can correct me there or add to that.
No, that was a beautiful explanation. I mean, that's exactly the difference, and the underlying principle, between both is exactly the same of having your body create these copies of the protein. More work has been done in the past with adenoviral, what they're called vectors, which is just what Dr. Rhoads was explaining, just the packaging. A vector, it's a package, have been done in the past with that kind of mentality. But I think what's really exciting for the mRNA vaccines that she's discussing and we're using now is that it kind of simplifies that even one step further, in that you don't have to unzip and then kind of read the message on the DNA. You are giving the cells that message to go ahead and make the protein right away. And I think it's important for people in the public too to realize that as fast as the timeline is and as quick as it seems like we've adopted this technology, some very brilliant people for decades have been working on this in a variety of levels of scientific study. So it is not something that just kind of popped up last May or last April. This is a technique that people have been planning for exactly this moment, frankly. But in terms of the familiarity with adenoviruses, I think that's definitely something that's been used more previously. But so far, the response seems really great to the mRNA vaccines, and the side effects seem quite minimal overall for the majority of recipients. So I'm excited. It seems to be a much quicker process for adapting these vaccines as we go forward. So that's really promising, because I think many people are familiar with, for instance, when we need a new flu vaccine every year or multiple flu vaccine strains, the process has to begin much in advance for them to try to get enough quantity of vaccine available in time for flu season based on the data from last flu season. And so I think that kind of bottleneck in processing creates real challenges in the real world. And so the idea that you have a very flexible way of making those little zippers and putting them into the packages much faster and in larger quantities gives us a real tool in preventing ongoing problems with this virus in particular.
And I just want to tag on, because I love the story of the mRNA technology. I mean, I don't love it. It's sort of a sad story for the investigator, but effectively, this idea of using mRNA to teach your body how to make proteins was I think that I can't remember the scientist's name, but she started in 2009. And everybody was very excited. So how long ago was that? It's over 10 years, right? So everybody was really excited about the technology, but it was a solution with no problem. And so over time, people lost faith in the idea that it was going to move forward because they couldn't find a problem to apply it to. And so in that process, she lost the funding for her lab. She lost her lab. I mean, she really got demoted because they didn't have a problem for her solution. And so I do hope in time she gets lifted up for this amazing discovery, because really it was just a matter of the streams of opportunity coming together. The solution was already there. We just didn't have a problem. Now coronavirus is the problem that matches the solution.
Thank you, Dr. Rhoads. Do any of the other panelists want to add? Okay. Do any of the panelists have questions for one another?
Well, I see in a private chat, someone just sent me, her name is Catalin Carico. Thank you for that, because I think that she really needs to be lifted up. This is one of those situations where there'll be a Nobel Prize, 50 years from now, and the story will be told. We need to be telling it now, because people are concerned that this came up really quickly and it came, we got the technology really fast. It wasn't fast. It's been in the works for a while.
And Dr. Rhoads, her name is Catherine Calico.
You're muted, Dr. Rhoads.
Put it in the chat there.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, it is fascinating. I knew, I had heard that it was, that mRNA had already existed, but I didn't know this whole story. So it's fascinating to hear that. And, you know, for people who are concerned about the rapidity of how quickly the vaccines were created, this is a very, very important fact. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. And this has probably already been answered already, but I'll ask it again. I'm worried about side effects. I want to wait to get the vaccine. I want my kids to wait to get the vaccine until they absolutely must have it. Of course, I'll do it if it's mandatory, but I'm worried about missing work because of the side effects. So what would the response be to this person?
I can share what I tell people in clinic. I tell them now is the time. Now is the time. You know, the news you see about our efforts with you know, positive rates and hospitalization stuff, it looks pretty encouraging at this time. So I understand people thinking that they're a little less risk, but we're reaching this level of comfort because of the vaccine. And it does not mean that the risk is gone. And as Dr. Rhoads beautifully illustrated, there are variants that we're hopeful, but we don't know. And, you know, I think it's a matter of time until some of those make their way to different parts of the world. And so now is the time to become protected as much as you can protect yourself and your loved ones. I also counter that with side effects are real, and every treatment has a side effect. The best treatments all have side effects. This is a really good treatment and it does have side effects, but we are fortunate enough to have really good information about those side effects. And so here's what you can expect. And that's kind of how I prepare people. And I tell them, you are gonna feel tired. You are gonna have a sore shoulder. You are gonna have a headache. Most likely those are the things you'll feel afterwards. Some people don't get those things. They feel great. They never knew what happened and they just go about their day. Most folks will have at least those types of side effects. And there are some others, but they are quite mild compared to some side effects we have with other vaccines. And compared to potentially getting COVID-19, they're well worth it. You know, the median duration for some of these side effects is like 2.5 days. So it's really brief. The second dose does seem to bring more side effects than the first dose. That seems to be true with the younger adolescents as it was with the adults. But having been someone who had side effects with the second dose, I would still take that anytime over COVID-19 and the potential for the complications that it brings. So I really try to encourage them to, even if they're concerned or even if they're worried, to really think about how much those types of side effects are going to bother us compared to the risk that you have by not being protected against the virus. And then, you know, thanks to Natalie, thanks to Luisa, thanks to those who are sort of overseeing our operations, we are giving out the vaccine in a manner that is very highly monitored and regulated. And so we're watching very closely. And so the very real risk of a rare side effect is something that you're in the right place to get help if you need it afterwards. And I think that's the key message for people, that we are, we're here for you to give you the vaccine, but we're here for you afterwards to see how you're feeling and take care of you if those side effects are more than you expected, or if you have a very rare, allergic reaction or something of that nature. And I think most people are receptive to that. It's the newness of the situation, I think, is a big barrier for people, but the more doses that we provide and the more friends, family, employees, colleagues that they see who do well with those side effects or have mild side effects, I think the more confidence we have that it's really the right decision for each individual.
Thank you. I appreciate your response. We have another question, but it's exactly the same as the one I just asked. I will still ask it. My aunt is worried that she'll feel bad after she gets the vaccine. Right now, she feels fine. Why should she feel bad tomorrow if she doesn't have to? And that's, to me, it sounds like vaccine hesitancy. And if I'm going to feel bad, why would I help myself feel bad? So instead, I'm not going to get the vaccine. So what do I do if I made that choice?
I'd like to kind of speak to that. You know, the possibility of getting the actual COVID virus is still out there. And I actually have a personal friend whose family member has been recently intubated because of COVID. So because of that alone, I think it's worth having the minor side effects of getting the vaccine as opposed to still having the possibility of ending up in the hospital and ICU because of COVID.
Thank you. I appreciate your response. Dr. Rhoads?
I was just going to say, we try to reassure people on site about that the feeling bad part is very, very temporary, and that it really interestingly disappears like magic. I mean, you could feel really terrible and then suddenly you feel, you know, better. We also give examples for folks that that of all of the volunteers that we work with on our site have been vaccinated. We do sort of share our own personal experiences, and we've had such a broad diversity of how people come through the process. I share my own story, particularly to try to dispel the idea that, oh, it's always the second shot that's worse. I was braced for the second shot, had no symptoms at all. I mean, I was prepared to be, you know, laying down for 2 days. But with the first shot, I was dizzy, I had a headache. And it took me a couple of days and actually an NPR story of listening to somebody else's symptoms to recognize that I was having side effects. So I had it with the first shot, which is different than the story that everybody else tells. I have a volunteer staff who was knocked out cold after the second shot for about 6 hours. And then after that, he popped up and was back in action. And then I have another staff who had 0 side effects with either shot. So we just like to let people know, we're telling you that you may have these side effects because we don't want you to get worried that you have COVID and think that something's going wrong. But also we're letting you know that there's a possibility that you may have no side effects at all.
Thank you, Dr. Rhoads. And Ms. Hodgen, it is always helpful to have personal stories because we all have them. I know that a part of my challenges, I believe I was the last person on my team to have a vaccine. One of my challenges is when I talk to other people, not necessarily about my experience, but just about the facts. And even with the facts, you still have that hesitancy and you want to make the best decision for yourself. Then you make the decision for yourself, and then the person next to you chose not to. And so then you're worried about that person. And then you're trying to figure out how to bring them to the same, okay, I experienced what you did. I was hesitant. I decided to, because the risks to me are minimal. Compared to what actually could happen if I didn't take the vaccine. And so, you know, just within families, you try to figure out how to maneuver when half the family has and half the family hasn't. And so for me, it's you know, I'll probably be wearing a mask until 2022. Because for me, that gives me protection from other people because I know what I'm doing. And so I'm hoping that by talking and then especially having a group of educated, knowledgeable, experienced folks in the field, we can have more of these discussions that will pull people in just to listen and talk about their own personal stories, because eventually I believe people will make the best choice for themselves. It's just getting through that hurdle and knowing that you have support along the way. My team supported me along the way. And so I'm hoping that creating space like this, that we can, you know, support people along the way until they make that decision. And so I look at it as, this is what happens when you get the vaccine. This is what happens when you don't get the vaccine. And so we all need to be practicing social distancing, healthy hygiene, and wearing a mask. All of us need to.
And testing. I'm sorry, I just want to say, nobody's testing anymore.
That's true. One other thing I was going to say is it's also important to respect a person's decision. Just last night, I was speaking to a staff member who has not received her vaccine yet. She's a clinical person. She understands the risk. And I did not make her feel bad. I reminded her of, the benefits of it, but we respected the fact that she's just not ready. People have real fears, and it's better just to allow that dialogue and answer her questions than to try to force somebody into making that decision.
Thank you. And my last question is, how often do we need to provide this type of platform for our communities? Is this a weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly? How often do we need to be creating this space for community members to call in and talk to you all? Because this is, for me, has been reassuring, uplifting, and definitely educating. So how often should we be doing this for our communities?
Well, I think it's going to be more and more necessary, because I think the people who really wanted to get the vaccine and, sort of rushed it and would knock people down just to get it, that group is through. And the people with a lot of questions, and there are a lot of people out there that just they want their questions answered. They want to be heard, and they want someone to tell them something that feels right to them. And I think we need to do it more in this particular time. I think this is really important. And I think so too, now that we're also vaccinating younger children, parents are going to be very concerned and going to have a lot of questions. And I think that's another reason why we have to have more conversations with people.
Well, I'm probably a bad example of this response. So what I didn't say is that I'm the Associate Director for Community Engagement for the UCSF Cancer Center. And our first pillar of our mission is year-round, non-transactional community engagement. And what that means is we are here regardless of whether or not there is a study, a research project, an experiment, or some way in which we want to extract data from the community. We're just here. And what I hope is that community will look to us as a source of information. And so what that means is we're open all the time. So in our efforts with Umoja Health, since August, we've been meeting every week. There are some weeks when, we say, okay, we're not meeting this week. But what I've discovered in that process of just being in dialogue with community on a continual basis is that we don't have to do these very targeted, here are your questions about, here's your one opportunity to ask questions, and you may not have another opportunity. Instead, as we're moving through and talking about, well, what's in the news? When variants came up, we discussed what are variants? How do they happen? How do they emerge? When the J&J recall happened, we were discussing that. So by the time we get to, 8 months into it, people are conversant, right, in this process. And so we don't have to start from 0 to 60 because it's the only time we've met. And so for me, it's about the idea or the concept that trust develops at the pace of the relationship. So if you've got a relationship that's ongoing, there's less and less that you have to do each time because you're just in dialogue and people expect you to be there again next week. So you don't have to do the big heavy lift every single time. So the more you space it out, it's the more lifting there is to do. So, as I said, I think I'm a bad example because I'm willing to commit that time because I think that's the direction that we need to be transitioning how healthcare systems, public health interacts with community.
Thank you, Dr. Rhoads. Did anyone else on the panel have any input, or are there any last minute questions for the public, from the public to our panelists?
I just wanted to really appreciate the variety of kind of institutions, perspectives, and things, because I think many clinicians and groups, we're trying to stay abreast of this knowledge and developments too. And I have learned several things tonight from Dr. Rhoads, and I think it's useful in the dialogue to have, not to present one expert or two experts, but to have, community members and then communities members from the healthcare community, right? Where we're learning about this, trying to learn about it as fast as we can to benefit our patients. So I really appreciate the way you all set this up, and it's been a good experience.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. I really appreciate the feedback, and myself and the rest of the Belhaven Action team, we are doing our best to pivot to the community's needs. And we knew, considering that we don't have healthcare resources specifically in our community, that something needed to happen. And so this was a great start. Relationship that we've been building with Ravenswood Health Clinic, also Ravenswood School District, Umoja Health, Dr. Rhoads, Dr. Kala, and now Dr. Davis has been invaluable to the Belhaven Action team and also to our community. And I hope sometime soon, and I can say in this summer, because that's just next month, that we can set up some time to do this again. And I take to heart what you said, Dr. Rhoads, about having it happen more often. So maybe it'll be before we actually hit our summer solstice. Who knows? And on that note, is there anything closing that anyone else wanted to share? All right, well, thank you again, Dr. Davis, Dr. Rhoads, Ms. Buada, and Ms. Hodgen for being here. And thank you to the public for participating in this space with us. And we look forward to seeing you again. And Belhaven Action will resume COVID testing in July. I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank
Bye.
you very